The streets of Manhattan's garment district gleamed wet under sodium streetlights on this autumn evening in 1994. Steam rose from subway grates, swirling around the legs of late-night workers hurrying home past fabric warehouses and sample sale signs. In the shadow of the Fashion Institute of Technology, two men stood beneath a fire escape, their breath visible in the October chill. One wore an expensive cashmere overcoat, his hair slicked back with too much gel, his Rolex catching the light from a nearby deli. The other dressed in black from neck to ankle, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, his expression sharp and calculating behind wire-rimmed glasses. Rodrigo Montoya paced anxiously, his Italian loafers clicking against wet pavement. He was old money, inherited wealth, the kind of man who summered in the Hamptons and whose family name appeared on museum wings. His hands trembled as he lit a Marlboro, the flame from his gold lighter illuminating his boyish, frustrated face. "You're telling me she actually went through with it?" Rodrigo's voice cracked with disbelief. "Desdemona Brabantio married him? Actually married that designer?" Iago smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Iago Ferrara had been in the fashion industry for 15 years, working his way up from pattern cutter to creative director. He had the eye, the talent, the vision. What he didn't have, apparently, was the recognition. His dark eyes glittered with something dangerous as he opened his portfolio, revealing a glossy photograph clearly taken by a private investigator. Desdemona Brabantio, the world's most sought-after supermodel, her platinum blonde hair catching camera flashes, wearing an elegant cream silk slip dress, entering a downtown courthouse. Beside her, his hand protectively on her lower back, was Othello Moore. Othello Moore, the name that had revolutionized fashion. A 6'4" black man who moved through the industry like a force of nature, who had started with nothing, designing clothes in a Brooklyn basement, selling pieces from the trunk of a Toyota Corolla at underground clubs in the East Village. Now his atelier occupied 3 floors of a converted Soho warehouse. His label was stocked in Barney's and Bergdorf Goodman, and Vogue had called him the most important American designer since Halston. "Married him this afternoon, Deseferde 1. Iago confirmed, his voice smooth as expensive bourbon. "City Hall, downtown, very private, very discreet. Just a witness or two. She didn't even tell her father." Rodrigo took a desperate drag on his cigarette. "But you promised me, Iago. You said you were working on it. That you'd convince her I was the better match. My family, our connections, the merger between Montoya Hotels and Brabantio Media, it all made sense." "I tried," Iago said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I told her you were passionate about her, that you came from the right world, that you understood her background. But you know Desdemona. Headstrong, rebellious. She sees Othello as some kind of romantic hero, this self-made genius who rose from nothing. She finds his stories exotic, his struggles fascinating. To her, you're just another trust fund kid." He paused, letting the insult land. Her words, not mine. Rodrigo's face flushed red. He threw his cigarette down, grinding it viciously under his heel. That arrogant, does he even understand what he's taking? Desdemona isn't just any model. She's fashion royalty. Her father owns Couture Chronicle, Style International, half the trade publications in the industry. Emilio Brabantio made and destroyed careers before Othello even knew what a runway was. "Exactly my point," Iago said quietly, moving closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Which is why Emilio needs to know. Tonight. Right now. Imagine how he'll react when he discovers his precious daughter, his only child, has secretly married a man he never approved of, without his blessing, without even informing him. Emilio, who's been planning her future since she was born, who expected her to marry within their circle. But Othello's successful now," Rodrigo protested weakly. "He's respected, famous even. Won the CFDA award last year. He's an outsider." Iago cut him off sharply. "No matter how many awards he wins, no matter how many magazine covers he lands. To men like Emilio Brabantio, he'll always be the kid from the projects who got lucky. Old money doesn't forget. Old power doesn't forgive. And when Emilio learns his daughter chose Othello over someone like you, someone from their world, he'll be furious enough to cause problems. Real problems. The kind that can damage a career, freeze credit lines, influence editorial boards. A slow, bitter smile spread across Rodrigo's face as understanding dawned. We wake him up. We tell him tonight. We wake him up, Iago agreed. And we make sure he understands exactly what's been taken from him. The taxi's yellow form cut through the empty streets of the Upper East Side, its headlights sweeping across the facades of pre-war mansions and exclusive boutiques. Through rain-streaked windows, Rodrigo and Iago watched the city's elite neighborhoods slide past like frames in a fashion shoot. Pristine, polished, untouchable. The meter ticked steadily as they traveled deeper into old money territory, where family names were carved into marble building entrances, and doormen wore uniforms that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Emilio Brabantio's townhouse stood on East 73rd Street like a fortress of tradition, its limestone facade glowing under discreet brass lighting. 5 stories of understated wealth, with wrought iron balconies and windows that spoke of generations of refined taste. This was where fashion empires were built, where editorial decisions were made over morning espresso, where the pulse of an entire industry could be controlled from behind hand-carved mahogany doors. Iago paid the driver and stepped onto the sidewalk, his dark coat billowing in the wind. Rodrigo followed, his nervousness evident in the way he kept adjusting his collar, smoothing his hair, checking his reflection in the polished brass nameplate beside the entrance. The building's lobby was dimly lit, all marble and mirrors, with a night doorman who recognized wealth at a glance. "Gentlemen, it's rather late," the doorman said, his voice carrying the practiced deference of someone who served the wealthy but maintained boundaries. "Mr. Brabantio has retired for the evening. This is urgent," Iago said smoothly, pressing a $50 bill into the man's gloved hand. "Family business. Mr. Brabantio would want to be disturbed." The doorman's eyebrows raised, but the money disappeared efficiently. Top floor, private elevator. The elevator rose silently through floors that housed some of fashion's most influential figures. Through the brass grillwork, they glimpsed marble hallways lined with original fashion illustrations, framed Vogue covers spanning decades, photographs of legendary designers and their muses. This was a building where style history lived and breathed. Emilio Brabantio's penthouse door was solid oak with brass fittings that reflected their distorted faces like funhouse mirrors. Iago's finger found the doorbell and held it down, the chimes echoing through what they could only imagine were rooms filled with priceless fashion artifacts, first-edition style magazines, and furniture that appeared in Architectural Digest. Footsteps approached soft at first, then harder as urgency took hold. The door opened to reveal Emilio Brabantio himself. Despite the late hour, even roused from sleep, he commanded presence. In his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, he wore a burgundy silk robe over matching pajamas, his bearing still regal despite his obvious confusion. This was a man accustomed to power, to control, to being informed of everything that mattered in his world before it happened. "Rodrigo?" Emilio's voice carried the refined accent of someone educated at prestigious institutions, polished through decades of high society gatherings. "Iago? What in God's name are you doing here at this hour? It's past midnight." "Mr. Brabantio," Rodrigo began, his voice tight with nervous energy. "We had to come. We couldn't wait until morning. It's about Desdemona." Emilio's expression shifted instantly from confusion to sharp attention, the protective instincts of a father engaging like a switch being thrown. "Desdemona? What about her? Has something happened? An accident?" "Sir," Iago stepped forward, his voice grave and measured. "Your daughter has been stolen from you. Tonight. While you slept. While you trusted that she was safe in her apartment. She was taken by someone who has no right to her. Someone who used charm and exotic stories to seduce her away from everything you've built for her. What are you talking about? Emilio's voice rose, sleep disappearing entirely as alarm took hold. Taken? By whom? Othello Moore. Rodrigo spat, unable to contain his bitterness. The designer. They were married this afternoon at City Hall. A secret ceremony. She didn't even invite you, didn't ask your blessing, didn't consider how this betrayal would affect you or the business or the family reputation. The color drained from Emilio's face as he processed the information. His hands gripped the doorframe, knuckles white against the dark wood. For a moment, he looked every one of his years, the weight of this news settling on him like a physical burden. Married? He whispered. My Desdemona? Married too. To him? I'm afraid it's true, sir, Iago said softly, producing the photograph again. My sources in the industry are reliable. They have witnesses. It's already done. Emilio stared at the photograph, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. The successful, controlling father, who had guided his daughter's career from childhood modeling to international superstardom, was confronting the reality that she had made the most important decision of her life without him. Emilio's face transformed in the hallway's amber lighting, fury replacing shock as the full implications crashed over him. His silver hair, disheveled from sleep, caught the light like brushed metal as he stepped fully into the doorframe, his burgundy silk robe billowing around him like battle armor. The refined patrician mask he wore in public board meetings and Fashion Week galas cracked completely, revealing something primal and dangerous underneath. That manipulative bastard, he hissed, his cultured accent sharpening to a blade's edge. I knew from the moment he appeared at Fashion Week 3 years ago, strutting around like he owned the industry. I knew he was dangerous. All that charm, those stories about rising from nothing, the way he looked at her during fittings, I should have banned her from working with his label immediately. The photograph trembled in his manicured hands as he studied it again, searching for some detail that might prove it false, finding none. Desdemona's face in the image radiated genuine happiness, the kind of joy that couldn't be manufactured for cameras. Her hand rested on Othello's chest with intimate familiarity. And her wedding dress, a simple cream silk piece that was undoubtedly one of Othello's own designs, seemed to glow against her porcelain skin. He used her, Emilio continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. Feeding on his own outrage, used her name, her connections, her influence to legitimize himself in circles he could never enter on his own merit. And she was naive enough to fall for his calculated seduction. The sob stories about growing up poor, the tales of struggle and determination, all designed to make her feel sorry for him, to see him as some romantic figure instead of the opportunist he really is. Iago nodded gravely, his expression perfectly calibrated to appear sympathetic while stoking the flames. Sir, I've worked with Othello for 2 years now. I've seen how he operates. He's brilliant at reading people, at knowing exactly what they want to hear. With Desdemona, he played the role of the misunderstood artist, the self-made genius who needed saving by someone pure and beautiful. Where are they now? Emilio demanded, stepping back into his penthouse and gesturing for them to follow. The interior was a temple to fashion history, walls lined with vintage Vogue covers under museum-quality lighting. Display cases containing accessories worn by legendary models, original sketches by Dior, Chanel, and Saint Laurent framed like precious artwork. Even in his rage, Emilio moved through this space with the reverence of someone who understood he was a custodian of cultural legacy. His atelier in Soho, Rodrigo answered quickly. The converted warehouse on Spring Street. They're probably there now, celebrating their deception. Emilio vanished into his dressing room, emerging minutes later in a perfectly pressed charcoal wool suit, white shirt, and navy silk tie armor for the war he was about to wage. His transformation was complete. From shocked father to industry titan, from vulnerable man to calculating power broker, He moved to an antique mahogany desk and lifted a heavy crystal phone, his fingers flying across the numbers. Jenkins? Yes, I know what time it is. Wake up the full legal team. Now. I want them at the office within the hour. He paused, listening. Because my daughter has made a catastrophic mistake, and I need to understand exactly what legal options we have to protect the family assets and business interests. Corporate marriage, inheritance law, contract nullification, everything. Another pause. No, Jenkins, I am not overreacting. I am protecting 30 years of business relationships and a media empire worth $200 million from a fortune hunter who has manipulated his way into our family. He slammed the phone down and turned to face them, his eyes blazing with cold fury. The refined gentleman was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous, a man with unlimited resources and the connections to use them ruthlessly. We're going to Soho, he announced, straightening his tie with sharp, precise movements. I'm going to look this Othello more in the eye and inform him that he has made the greatest mistake of his life, that he has stolen something precious from a family that has the power to destroy him completely, that his little Cinderella story is about to become a cautionary tale about what happens when nobodies forget their place. The elevator descended through the building's elegant floors, carrying them back toward the street where a black Lincoln Town car waited at the curb, its engine purring in the night air. The driver, roused from his waiting slumber, straightened as Emilio approached, recognizing the particular energy that meant business was about to be conducted. Downtown, Emilio commanded as they settled into the leather seats. Soho. Spring Street. And drive fast. The car pulled away from the curb, heading south through the sleeping city toward the artistic district, where Othello had built his fashion empire from nothing, where creative energy pulsed through converted industrial spaces, and where a confrontation between old power and new talent was about to unfold under the neon glow of late-night galleries and 24-hour diners. The Othello Moore Atelier occupied 3 floors of a converted textile warehouse on Spring Street, its original brick walls and cast-iron columns preserved like monuments to industrial history. Large windows faced east, ready to catch the morning light that would soon illuminate cutting tables and dress forms. But tonight they reflected the warm glow from within, like golden eyes watching over Soho's sleeping streets. The space breathed with creative energy bolts of silk and cashmere, organized by color-created rainbow walls. Sketches and fabric swatches covered every surface, and half-finished garments hung from rolling racks like ghosts of future fashion. On the 3rd floor, in what had once been the building's executive offices, and now served as Othello's private design studio, soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Miles Davis's trumpet wove through the space, mixing with the distant sounds of late-night Soho, the rumble of garbage trucks, the laughter from nearby galleries staying open past midnight, the occasional taxi horn echoing off the cobblestone streets below. Othello Moore stood before a full-length mirror, removing his wedding jacket with the careful precision of someone who understood fabric and construction intimately. At 35, he possessed the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it tall and lean, with dark skin that seemed to absorb and reflect light simultaneously, hands that moved with the grace of someone who had spent years creating beauty. His wedding suit was one of his own designs, naturally. A midnight blue wool so finely woven it looked almost black in certain light, cut with mathematical precision to complement his frame. You're staring at yourself. Desdemona laughed from across the room, her voice carrying the musical quality that had made her not just a supermodel but a media darling. She sat curled in a vintage leather chair beside his drafting table, her cream silk wedding dress also his design pooling around her like liquid moonlight. At 26, she was at the height of her career in beauty, her platinum blonde hair catching the studio lights, her green eyes bright with the happiness of a woman who had just married for love rather than convention. I'm staring at the jacket construction, Othello protested with a grin, hanging the garment carefully on a nearby dress form. The shoulder line isn't quite right. See how it pulls slightly when I move my arm? I'll need to adjust the pattern before we put this design into production. On your wedding night, you're thinking about production patterns? Desdemona rose from the chair with fluid grace, the kind of movement that had made her the most sought-after model of her generation. She approached him slowly, her bare feet silent on the polished concrete floor. "Mr. Moore, I think I need to redirect your attention." She reached up to unknot his tie, her fingers working with deliberate slowness. The silk slipped through her hands like water, and she let it fall to the floor between them. Her touch was electric, familiar yet still thrilling after 8 months of stolen moments between fashion shows and photo shoots, secret dinners in out-of-the-way restaurants where they could be themselves rather than public figures. "Mrs. Moore," he said softly, testing the name, savoring it. His hands found her waist, fingers spreading across the silk that clung to her like a second skin. "I like how that sounds." "So do I," she whispered, standing on her toes to kiss him. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, carrying all the promise of a future they had claimed for themselves, despite the disapproval they both knew would come. They had met during Milan Fashion Week 18 months earlier, at a party hosted by Versace in a palazzo overlooking the Navigli Canal system. She had been wearing Galliano. He remembered a dramatic black evening gown that should have overwhelmed her delicate features, but instead made her look like a warrior goddess. He had been the unexpected American presence at European Fashion Week, the designer everyone was curious about but no one quite knew how to categorize. "Your father is going to hate this," Othello said against her hair, breathing in the scent of her perfume custom-blended jasmine and sandalwood that had become as familiar to him as his own skin. "My father hates everything that isn't his idea," Desdemona replied, pulling back to look at him directly. "He's spent 26 years trying to control every aspect of my life, which designers I work with, which photographers I pose for, which parties I attend, which men I'm seen with. But this? Us? This is mine. This is the first thing I've ever chosen completely for myself." Othello's expression grew serious. "He has power, Desdemona. Real power. The kind that can close doors, kill careers, freeze credit lines. Are you prepared for what he might do when he finds out?" "He can't touch you," she said fiercely. "You're too talented, too successful. You have your own reputation now, your own clientele. Besides, once he sees how happy I am, once he gets to know you." A sound from the street below cut through their conversation, the slam of car doors. Voices carrying up through the night air with unmistakable urgency. Othello moved to the window, peering down through the glass at the scene, unfolding on Spring Street. A black Lincoln Town car sat at the curb, its engine still running, exhaust visible in the cool October air. "What is it?" Desdemona asked, joining him at the window. "3 men," Othello said quietly, his voice tightening with recognition and concern. "Getting out of a very expensive car at 2 in the morning. The building's entry buzzer erupted through the atelier with violent insistence, its harsh electric sound cutting through the jazz like a fire alarm. The buzzing continued in aggressive bursts, short, sharp, demanding the kind of sound that spoke of fury barely contained. Othello and Desdemona exchanged glances, both understanding immediately that their brief moment of private celebration was over. "That's my father," Desdemona said quietly, her face pale but determined. She moved away from the window, straightening her dress with automatic precision, her model's training taking over even in crisis. I recognize his impatience. Othello walked to the intercom system mounted beside his drafting table, his movements deliberate and calm despite the tension radiating through his shoulders. His finger hovered over the button for a moment before pressing down. "Yes? Open this door immediately." Emilio Brabantio's voice crackled through the speaker, distorted but unmistakably authoritative. "I know my daughter is up there, and I know what you've done. We need to talk. Now." "Mr. Brabantio," Othello replied evenly, his tone respectful despite the circumstances. "It's very late. Perhaps we could arrange to meet tomorrow, during business hours, when we can discuss things properly. Don't you dare patronize me more. The voice from the speaker grew sharper, more venomous. You've stolen my daughter through some kind of manipulation. Some spell you've cast over her with your exotic stories and foreign charm. The least you can do is face me like a man instead of hiding behind your locked doors. Desdemona moved quickly to the intercom, pressing the button herself. Daddy, please, don't make a scene in the street. Come up, we'll talk. The buzzing stopped abruptly, replaced by the distant sound of the building's front door opening with a heavy metallic click. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell multiple sets, moving quickly but with purpose. Othello counted them automatically. 3 men, based on the rhythm and weight of the steps on the iron stairs. He brought witnesses, Othello observed, moving to his jacket and slipping it back on with practiced efficiency. This isn't a private family conversation. This is a public confrontation. He wants to intimidate you, Desdemona said, her green eyes flashing with anger, and something else protective fury on behalf of the man she had just married. He thinks if he brings Rodrigo and whoever else, he can make you back down, make you seem like the villain in this situation. The footsteps grew louder, climbing the 3 flights with determination. Othello straightened his tie, smoothed his jacket, and moved to stand beside his drafting table, not hiding, but positioning himself in his own creative space, surrounded by the evidence of his talent and success. Fabric swatches and sketches covered the table's surface, testament to the vision and skill that had earned him recognition in an industry notorious for eating outsiders alive. The studio door burst open without ceremony, Emilio Brabantio striding through the threshold like a general entering conquered territory. Behind him came Rodrigo, his expensive overcoat still damp from the night air, and Iago, moving with predatory grace, his dark eyes taking in every detail of the space with calculating precision. Emilio's appearance was immaculate despite the late hour and emotional turmoil, his charcoal suit pressed to perfection, his silver hair combed back with military precision, his tie knotted with the kind of exactness that spoke of a man accustomed to controlling every detail of his environment. But his face betrayed his fury, flushed cheeks, tight jaw, eyes bright with barely contained rage. Desdemona, he said, his voice tight with disappointment and anger. Look at yourself. Look what you've become. Sneaking around like some common... Father, stop! Desdemona moved to stand beside Othello, her hand finding his arm in a gesture of solidarity that spoke volumes about where her loyalty now lay. We're married. Legally, properly married. This is my husband. Your husband? Emilio's voice rose, echoing off the brick walls and exposed beams. This opportunist, who has seduced you away from your family, your responsibilities, your proper place in society? Do you have any idea what you've thrown away? The connections, the business relationships, the carefully built alliances that took me 30 years to create? Othello stepped forward slightly, his voice calm and measured. Mr. Brabantio, I understand your shock, your disappointment that Desdemona didn't seek your blessing before our marriage. But I love your daughter deeply, and she loves me. Our marriage isn't a business transaction or a social arrangement. It's a union based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. Affection? Rodrigo spat from near the doorway, his face twisted with bitter jealousy. You think this is about affection? This is about calculation. About using her name and connections to legitimize yourself in circles you don't belong in. You're a social climber, more, nothing more. Rodrigo has a point, Iago said smoothly, his voice reasonable and measured. The perfect counterpoint to Rodrigo's emotional outburst. Othello, we've worked together. I've seen how ambitious you are, how driven. It's one of your strengths as a designer. But surely you can understand how this looks from the outside, the timing, the secrecy, the fact that you chose to marry without involving her family. The studio's atmosphere grew electric with tension. The warm, creative space transformed into a battlefield where old money faced new talent, where tradition clashed with innovation. The overhead track lighting cast sharp shadows across the confrontation, illuminating faces like a photographer's strobe, capturing moments of raw emotion that would have made powerful magazine spreads if the circumstances weren't so personally devastating. Othello moved closer to the center of the room, his presence commanding despite being outnumbered. His dark skin seemed to absorb and reflect the studio lights, creating an almost sculptural quality as he stood among his life's work, the sketches, fabric samples, and half-finished garments that represented his journey from Brooklyn basement to Soho success. "You want to know how this looks?" Othello's voice carried quiet strength, the kind of authority that came from years of proving himself in rooms where he was the only one who looked like him. "This looks like a successful businessman who fell in love with an extraordinary woman and married her. This looks like two adults making a decision about their own lives without seeking permission from industry gatekeepers who think they control other people's happiness." Emilio's face darkened further, his patrician features twisting with indignation. "Don't lecture me about industry gatekeepers. More. I built this industry while you were learning to use a sewing machine. I've created careers, launched magazines, influenced taste for 3 decades. And in all that time, I've seen dozens of opportunists like you, charming, talented perhaps, but ultimately parasitic. You feed off established power because you can't create your own legitimacy." "Legitimacy?" Desdemona's voice cut through the room like silk tearing, sharp and clear and absolutely furious. She stepped away from Othello's protective presence and moved toward her father, her wedding dress flowing around her like liquid defiance. "Legitimacy comes from talent, from innovation, from creating something beautiful that didn't exist before. Not from being born into the right family, or inheriting the right last name, or attending the right schools." Her green eyes blazed with the kind of passion that had made her more than just another beautiful face on magazine covers. "Othello has more legitimacy in his little finger than half the trust fund designers you've promoted over the years. He didn't buy his way into this industry, he earned it, piece by piece, collection by collection. Desdemona, he's bewitched you," Emilio said desperately, his voice cracking slightly as he saw his daughter's unwavering support for her new husband. "This isn't you speaking. This is his influence, his manipulation. The girl I raised would never throw away everything we've built together for some romantic fantasy about struggling artists and self-made men." Iago stepped forward from his position near the door, his movement fluid and calculated. "Perhaps," he said quietly, his tone suggesting reason and compromise. "We're all letting emotion cloud our judgment here. Emilio, surely we can find a way to make this work for everyone involved. Othello is a talented designer with a growing reputation. Desdemona is fashion royalty. Properly managed, this could actually benefit both families, both businesses." "Properly managed?" Rodrigo sputtered, his face flushing red with incredulous anger. "Iago, whose side are you on here? I thought we came to expose this fortune hunter, not to negotiate business arrangements." "I'm on the side of practical solutions," Iago replied smoothly, his dark eyes moving between the faces in the room like a chess master calculating moves. "Rodrigo, your personal disappointment aside, we need to think strategically about what's best for the industry, for the business relationships, for everyone involved." Othello studied Iago's face, something flickering behind his eyes, a brief moment of uncertainty, of trying to read between the lines of his business partner's sudden diplomatic turn. But before he could speak, Emilio slammed his fist down on the drafting table, sending fabric swatches scattering across the polished concrete floor like colorful leaves in a windstorm. "Enough!" Emilio roared, his composure finally cracking completely. "There will be no negotiations, no business arrangements, no acceptance of this travesty. Desdemona, you will come home with me tonight. We will have this marriage annulled immediately, and you will never see this man again. I have lawyers standing by, private investigators ready to dig into every aspect of his background, and enough influence to destroy his career completely if he doesn't release his hold on you voluntarily." The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of late-night traffic and the soft jazz still playing from the hidden speakers. Miles Davis's trumpet seemed to mock the tension with its smooth, melancholy beauty. Othello and Desdemona stood close together, her hand finding his, their fingers interlacing with the natural ease of two people who had chosen each other against all odds. "Daddy," Desdemona said quietly, her voice carrying final determination. "You taught me to recognize quality, to appreciate craftsmanship, to value authenticity over imitation. Look around this room. Look at what Othello has created. Look at how he's revolutionized American fashion. And then look at me. Really look at me. And tell me you've ever seen me happier." Spring arrived in New York with the kind of electric energy that made fashion hearts race faster. By May 1995, 6 months after that confrontational wedding night, the Othello Moore Atelier had expanded into the adjoining building on Spring Street, transformed from a 3-floor operation into a fashion empire that stretched across an entire city block. The original brick walls now housed cutting-edge design studios, a photography space for editorial shoots, a private showroom for VIP clients, and offices that buzzed with the controlled chaos of a business exploding beyond all expectations. The main design floor hummed with creative energy on this particular Thursday afternoon. Seamstresses hunched over industrial sewing machines, their practiced hands guiding silk and cashmere through precise stitches, while bolts of fabric in jewel tones created rainbow walls that caught the spring sunlight streaming through restored warehouse windows. Sketchboards covered in Othello's latest designs lined the space-flowing evening gowns that seemed to defy gravity, structured day suits that redefined power dressing, avant-garde pieces that pushed the boundaries between fashion and art. Desdemona Moore moved through this creative sanctuary like a queen surveying her kingdom, but there was nothing royal or distant about her presence. She wore one of her husband's recent creations, a flowing midi dress in emerald green silk that made her eyes appear almost supernatural in the afternoon light, and moved with the fluid grace that had made her one of the world's most recognizable faces. But now she was more than a supermodel. She had become the creative director of women's ready-to-wear, her instincts for what women actually wanted to wear, proving as valuable as her ability to make clothes look magnificent on camera. The shoulder line on the burgundy jacket is still pulling. She called out to Marco, the head pattern maker, a 70-year-old Italian master who had worked for Valentino before Othello convinced him to join this American upstart. "Can we take it in half an inch at the seam and see how it falls?" Marco nodded, his weathered hands already reaching for his tools. "Si, signora. But you know, your husband, he has the eye for construction. Maybe we should wait for him to see?" "He's with Iago in the business meeting," Desdemona replied, her fingers trailing along a rack of sample garments. "The Barney's presentation. They want to expand our floor space again. Apparently we're outselling everyone except Calvin Klein in their contemporary section." The mention of success brought a smile to her lips. The fashion press had initially treated their marriage as a curiosity, then a scandal. But success had a way of rewriting narratives. Vogue had featured them on the cover 3 months earlier. Fashion's power couple. How love conquered industry politics. And the photo shoot had captured something real between them, an intimacy that transcended the usual fashion world artifice. The studio door opened, and Michael Cassio entered like a burst of California sunshine into the New York workspace. At 28, he was the kind of male model who transcended the industry's usual pretty boy stereotypes: intelligent eyes, genuine warmth, the ability to make clothes look effortless rather than forced. His sandy brown hair caught the light as he moved, and his smile had the kind of authenticity that made everyone around him feel more attractive by association. "Mrs. Moore," he called out, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of conversation across crowded parties and noisy photo shoots. "Please tell me you have coffee stronger than what they serve at the Condé Nast building. I just spent 4 hours in their conference room looking at layouts, and I think my brain has turned to fashion magazine mush." Desdemona laughed, the sound musical and genuine. Cassio, you're a lifesaver. I was just thinking we needed someone with actual commercial modeling experience to look at these pieces from a practical standpoint. How do they move? How do they photograph? What works in real life versus what looks good on paper? Cassio approached the garment rack, his trained eye moving over the pieces with professional assessment. He reached for a charcoal wool blazer, holding it up to examine the cut and construction. Your husband's tailoring keeps getting better. Look at this buttonhole work. It's practically couture quality but clean enough for ready-to-wear production. He's been studying with Marco, learning traditional Italian techniques, Desdemona explained, moving to stand beside him as they examined the garment together. But he adapts everything for American bodies, American lifestyles. European fashion can be so impractical sometimes. Their heads bent together over the blazer, both absorbed in the technical discussion of construction and fit. Cassio's hand brushed Desdemona's as they turned the garment to examine the back vent, a brief contact that was entirely professional but intimate, in the way that fashion industry collaboration often became bodies and clothing and aesthetic judgment, all mixing together in the creative process. Neither of them noticed Iago standing in the doorway, his dark eyes taking in every detail of their interaction with calculating precision. He remained motionless for nearly a minute, watching the way they leaned toward each other, the easy familiarity in their conversation, the unconscious synchronization of two professionals who enjoyed working together. His expression revealed nothing, but behind the neutral facade, wheels were turning with mechanical precision. When he finally moved, it was with deliberate casualness, approaching them with the kind of smile that had made him successful in an industry built on charm and strategic relationships. Cassio, good to see you. How did the Condé Nast meeting go? Are we confirmed for the September issue spread? Cassio straightened, his expression brightening with professional enthusiasm. Better than confirmed, they want 8 pages instead of 6. And they're considering it for the cover story if we can deliver something that feels both editorial and commercial. Anna Wintour herself signed off on the concept. He paused, running a hand through his sandy hair. They want to shoot it at the Carlisle Hotel, very elegant, very New York aristocracy meets modern design. 8 pages, Iago repeated thoughtfully, his voice carrying just the right note of impressed approval. That's significant exposure. Othello must be thrilled. He is, Desdemona confirmed, her face glowing with pride for her husband's continued success. Though he's been so focused on the business expansion meetings, I think the creative side sometimes gets pushed aside. He misses the hands-on design work when he's stuck in conference rooms talking numbers with department store buyers. Iago nodded sympathetically, moving closer to examine the garments they had been discussing. His approach was casual, friendly, but his dark eyes missed nothing the way Cassio's gaze lingered on Desdemona's face when she spoke passionately about the business, the way she unconsciously touched the fabric of the blazer while explaining design concepts, the easy familiarity between two people who clearly enjoyed each other's professional company. It's good that he has you both to handle the creative development while he manages the business side, Iago observed, his tone carefully neutral. Partnership is essential in this industry. Trust becomes everything when you're building something this significant. The word trust hung in the air for a moment, and something flickered across Cassio's face, a brief uncertainty, as if he were questioning whether his presence here might be misinterpreted. He stepped back slightly from the garment rack, creating distance that hadn't existed moments before. I should probably get going, Cassio said, his voice losing some of its earlier warmth. I have a fitting at Calvin Klein in an hour, and you know how they are about punctuality. Stay, Desdemona said quickly, her hand reaching out toward him in a gesture that was purely friendly, but could be read differently by suspicious eyes. We haven't finished going through the pieces for the Condé Nast shoot. Your input on what works for photography versus runway is invaluable. Iago watched this interaction with the focused attention of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. Cassio, you've been working with a lot of different designers lately, he said conversationally. Calvin, Donna Karan. That new Marc Jacobs project. You must see the differences in how they approach male models, how they direct the shoots. Every designer has their own vision. Cassio agreed, seemingly relieved to shift the conversation to safer professional territory. But working with Othello and Desdemona feels different, more collaborative, less hierarchical. They listen to what works from a practical standpoint instead of just imposing their aesthetic. Collaboration, Iago repeated, his voice thoughtful. Yes, I can see that. You and Desdemona have developed quite a working relationship over these past few months. Very intuitive communication. There was something in his tone that made both Cassio and Desdemona glance at him sharply, but his expression remained perfectly friendly and professional. Still, the words seemed to hang in the air like expensive perfume, beautiful on the surface, but with an underlying note that was difficult to identify and vaguely unsettling. We work well together professionally, Desdemona said firmly, her voice carrying a subtle warning that she had detected the implication and rejected it entirely. The same way I work well with Marco, or with the seamstresses, or with you, Iago. Fashion is a collaborative industry. Of course, Iago agreed smoothly. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. It's just that creative partnerships can be intense, especially when there's mutual respect and admiration involved. The line between professional and personal can sometimes blur, particularly in an industry where physical beauty and aesthetic appreciation are so central to the work. Cassio's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Iago, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. Iago interrupted gently, his voice carrying wounded innocence. Simply observing that you both bring passion to your work. It's one of the reasons you're so successful. But sometimes passion can be misinterpreted by outsiders who don't understand the creative process. The studio fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the sewing machines and the soft electronic beeping of a fax machine somewhere in the business offices above. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows seemed suddenly harsh, casting sharp shadows across faces that had been warm with creative energy only moments before. Desdemona moved to her desk, her movements slightly stiff with controlled irritation. Cassio, why don't you take the samples for the Calvin Klein fitting? We can continue our discussion about the Condé Nast pieces tomorrow when Othello's back from his meetings. Good idea, Cassio agreed, relief evident in his voice. He gathered his leather portfolio and moved toward the door with practiced efficiency. I'll call you tomorrow about the shooting schedule. After he left, Desdemona turned to face Iago directly, her green eyes bright with controlled anger. What exactly was that about? Iago's expression was a masterpiece of confused innocence. I'm not sure what you mean. I was simply making conversation about your professional collaboration. Desdemona's question hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigarette, acrid and impossible to ignore. Iago's face remained perfectly composed, but she could see something flickering behind his dark eyes, calculation masked as concern, strategy disguised as friendship. The afternoon light streaming through the warehouse windows had shifted, casting longer shadows across the design studio's polished concrete floors, transforming the creative space into something that felt less warm, less welcoming. Desdemona, Iago said softly, his voice carrying the tone of someone reluctantly sharing painful truth. You know I would never want to cause problems in your marriage. You and Othello have built something beautiful together, both personally and professionally. But sometimes, as your business partner and friend, I feel obligated to mention things that might be misunderstood by others. What things? Desdemona's voice was sharp now, her model's instincts for detecting false poses kicking into high alert. She had spent years in front of cameras, learning to read the subtle shifts in photographers' expressions, the way directors communicated through glances and gesture. Iago's performance was excellent, but it was still a performance. The way people talk, Iago continued, moving closer to the window, his silhouette dark against the spring sunlight. You know how the fashion industry thrives on gossip, speculation, rumors. And when a beautiful woman works closely with a handsome male model, especially when they have obvious chemistry. Chemistry? Desdemona's voice rose slightly, confusion mixing with indignation. Professional chemistry. Creative collaboration. The same chemistry I have with our photographers, our stylists, our entire creative team. Of course, Iago agreed quickly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. I know that. You know that. But others, people who don't understand the intimacy required for creative work, they see extended private meetings, shared lunches, the way you laugh together over design details, and they begin to construct narratives. Desdemona felt something cold settling in her stomach. A familiar sensation from her modeling days, when she first learned that her every gesture would be analyzed, interpreted, potentially twisted into scandal. What narratives? Who's talking? Iago sighed deeply, as if the weight of unwanted knowledge was heavy on his shoulders. Rodrigo has been spreading rumors. Nothing specific, nothing actionable, but he's still bitter about losing you, and he's been suggesting to certain people in the industry that your marriage might not be as solid as it appears. He implies that you married Othello for career advancement but maintain other interests. That's ridiculous, Desdemona said flatly, her anger building like pressure in a steam kettle. Rodrigo is a spoiled trust fund baby who can't accept that I chose someone else. His opinion means nothing. It means nothing to you and me, Iago agreed. But Rodrigo has connections, family influence, access to the same social circles where editorial decisions are made and business relationships are formed. And when he whispers his poison to the right people, it can spread through the industry like ink through water. Desdemona moved to her desk, her hands gripping the edge with enough force to whiten her knuckles. Behind her, dress forms draped with partially completed garments stood like silent witnesses to this conversation, their headless torsos creating an unsettling gallery of fashion in progress. Has Othello heard these rumors? Not yet, Iago said carefully. But you know how he is about your reputation, your honor. He's already sensitive about the circumstances of your marriage, the age difference, the racial dynamics that some people continue to whisper about. If he starts hearing suggestions that you're involved with Cassio, I'm not involved with Cassio. Desdemona's voice echoed off the brick walls, sharp and clear, and completely truthful. We work together. We collaborate professionally. We're friends, the same way you and I are friends. But friendship between men and women in this industry can be complicated, Iago said gently. Especially when it involves overnight photo shoots, travel to fashion weeks, private fittings, intimate creative discussions. The boundaries can appear blurred to outsiders. Appear blurred, Desdemona repeated slowly, her green eyes focusing on Iago with laser intensity. You're very careful with your words, Iago. You're not saying anything's actually happening. You're talking about appearances, implications, other people's interpretations. Iago moved closer, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. I'm trying to protect you, and protect your marriage. Because if Othello starts hearing these rumors, if someone shows him photos of you and Cassio together, if they point out how much time you spend in private consultation, how comfortable you are with each other. Photos. Desdemona's blood went cold. What photos? Fashion week parties? Gallery openings? Industry events? Iago said, his tone suggesting this was common knowledge rather than surveillance. You know how photographers are at these things. They capture every interaction, every gesture. And when someone with malicious intent looks through those images, they can find moments that, taken out of context, suggest intimacy where none exists. The studio suddenly felt smaller, more claustrophobic, as if the walls were closing in around her. Desdemona had always known that her life was lived in public, that every appearance was documented, analyzed, potentially weaponized, but she had thought marriage would provide some protection, some privacy. Instead, it seemed to have made her more vulnerable, not less. The autumn of 1000, 995 arrived in Soho with the kind of crisp energy that made fashion professionals feel alive, their creative impulses sharpened by the changing light and the approaching frenzy of holiday collections. But inside the Othello Moore atelier, the atmosphere had grown heavy with unspoken tension, like the air before a thunderstorm when everything feels charged and dangerous. Othello stood in his private office on the fourth floor, a space that had once been his sanctuary but now felt more like a cell. The room was elegant in its simplicity, exposed brick walls lined with framed magazine covers featuring his designs, a massive mahogany desk inherited from a bankrupt textile company, windows that offered a perfect view of the cobblestone streets below where his success story had begun. But today, none of it brought him comfort. In his hands, he held a silk scarf that seemed to pulse with accusation. The fabric was exquisite, hand-painted silk in swirling shades of azure and gold, signed by the artist in one corner with delicate brushstrokes. He recognized it immediately because he had designed it himself, commissioned it as a birthday gift for Desdemona earlier that year. It was one of a kind, irreplaceable, intimate in the way that only a husband's carefully chosen present could be. And Iago had found it in Cassio's dressing room at the photography studio downtown. "You're certain it was his dressing room?" Othello asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his dark fingers tracing the scarf's painted edges with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Iago stood near the window, his silhouette sharp against the afternoon light streaming through the glass. His expression carried the perfect mixture of reluctant confirmation and genuine sorrow, like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis to a beloved patient. "I didn't want to believe it myself," he said quietly. "I went to the studio to check on the setup for tomorrow's Vogue shoot. You know how particular they are about lighting and backdrop arrangements. The cleaning crew was just finishing up after Cassio's private session with the German photographer." "Private session," Othello repeated, his voice hollow. The words seemed to echo in the office, bouncing off the brick walls and polished surfaces like ricocheting bullets. "For his personal portfolio," Iago continued, his tone carefully neutral. "Nothing unusual about that male models need to keep their books current. But when I was double-checking the dressing rooms to make sure everything was ready for our shoot, I found this on the floor beside his garment bag." Othello lifted the scarf to his face, breathing in its familiar scent. Desdemona's perfume still clung to the silk, that custom blend of jasmine and sandalwood that had become as essential to his happiness as air. The fragrance should have comforted him, reminded him of quiet mornings when she wore nothing but this scarf and sunlight. Instead, it felt like evidence of betrayal, proof of intimate moments shared with someone else. "There could be an innocent explanation," Othello said, but his voice carried no conviction. He was a man grasping at hope while drowning in suspicion. "Of course there could be," Iago agreed, moving closer to the desk with careful, measured steps. "Perhaps she loaned it to him for the shoot. Perhaps it fell from her bag when she visited the studio. Perhaps there's a completely reasonable explanation that we simply can't see right now." "But you don't believe that," Othello said, his dark eyes meeting Iago's with desperate intensity. "You wouldn't have brought this to me if you believed in innocent explanations." Iago sighed deeply, the sound carrying the weight of reluctant truth-telling. "Othello, you're my business partner, my friend. I've watched you build this empire from nothing, seen you overcome every obstacle the industry threw at you. The last thing I want is to see you destroyed by personal betrayal when you've worked so hard to achieve professional success." "Personal betrayal," Othello repeated slowly, tasting the words like bitter medicine. "I've been watching, trying to convince myself I was wrong," Iago continued, his voice growing softer, more confidential. "But the signs have been building for months. The private meetings that run late into the evening, the shared lunches that she claims are business but seem more intimate than professional. The way they look at each other during fittings, like they share secrets the rest of us aren't privy to." Othello moved to the window, still clutching the scarf, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Below, Soho bustled with its usual creative energy, artists and designers, and models moving through the streets like blood through arteries, feeding the heart of New York's fashion district. But he felt disconnected from it all, isolated by the growing certainty that his personal life was crumbling even as his professional success reached new heights. "She's been different lately," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Distracted, secretive about her schedule. When I ask about her day, she gives me general answers instead of the detailed stories she used to share. And when Cassio calls the house, she takes the phone into another room." "I've noticed that too," Iago said gently. "At the office, when he arrives, she immediately stops whatever conversation she's having with the rest of us. They develop this bubble of privacy, this intimate space that excludes everyone else." The scarf trembled in Othello's hands as rage began to replace heartbreak, his knuckles tightening around the silk until the delicate fabric seemed in danger of tearing. The autumn sunlight streaming through his office windows caught the gold threads woven through the hand-painted design, making them flash like tiny flames against the azure background. What had once been a symbol of love now felt like evidence of the most intimate betrayal imaginable. "How long?" Othello asked, his voice low and dangerous, vibrating with the kind of controlled fury that made smart people step back and reconsider their proximity. "How long has this been happening under my nose while I've been building our empire, expanding our influence, making us both wealthy and famous?" Iago moved with calculated caution, recognizing the shift in Othello's demeanor from heartbroken husband to something far more volatile. "I can't be certain," he said carefully, his tone suggesting reluctant honesty. "But looking back, connecting the dots, I think it started during Milan Fashion Week in February. Do you remember? You had to fly back early for the department store meetings, left Desdemona there to handle the final shows and press appearances. She stayed an extra 4 days, Othello said, his memory sharp and painful. Said she needed to review the European collections, study the trends, make connections for our international expansion. Cassio was there too," Iago added quietly, "shooting with Italian Vogue, working the Versace and Armani shows. 4 days in Milan, staying at the same hotel, attending the same parties, moving in the same circles." He paused, letting the implication settle. "When they returned, did you notice a change in their dynamic, a new familiarity?" Othello's mind raced backward through the months, reinterpreting every interaction, every shared laugh, every casual touch he had witnessed between his wife and the male model. Memories that had seemed innocent now took on sinister significance, the way Cassio's hand lingered on Desdemona's waist during photo shoots, the private conversations that stopped when Othello entered rooms, the inside jokes that excluded him from their shared understanding. "The Condé Nast shoot," Othello said suddenly, his voice sharp with realization. "Last month when they worked so late. She said they were perfecting the poses, making sure every shot was flawless. She didn't come home until after midnight. I drove past the studio around 11, Iago said, his voice heavy with regret. The lights were still on, but from the street I could see them through the windows. They weren't working, Othello. They were sitting close together on the couch in the lounge area, sharing wine, talking intimately, when I saw her hand on his face. "Stop," Othello commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. The scarf in his hands was now twisted into a rope-like shape, the beautiful silk distorted by his grip into something that looked almost like a weapon. "I don't want to hear the details. You need to hear them," Iago pressed gently, his voice carrying the authority of someone delivering necessary medicine. "Because this isn't just about personal betrayal anymore. This is about your reputation, your business. You're standing in an industry that feeds on scandal and weakness. If other people know, if photographers have captured evidence, if editors are whispering about it at parties, then your silence becomes complicity in your own destruction." Othello moved away from the window, pacing the office like a caged animal, his footsteps echoing off the polished concrete floors. The framed magazine covers on his walls seemed to mock him now, images of his success story, articles about his rise from nothing to fashion icon, Photographs of him with Desdemona at industry events, both of them smiling, with what appeared to be genuine happiness, but now looked like calculated performance. "She's made me a laughingstock," he said, his voice growing stronger, fed by anger instead of weakened by pain. The successful designer, who can create beautiful things but can't keep his own wife satisfied. The man who conquered the fashion world but lost control of his own household. "Not yet," Iago said quickly. "The rumors are still contained, still manageable. But if this continues, if they become more careless, more public—" "They won't become more careless," Othello interrupted, his voice cold and final. "Because this ends now. Tonight." Iago's expression shifted slightly, showing the first genuine emotion he had displayed during their entire conversation, concern mixed with something that might have been satisfaction. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to confront her," Othello said, his decision crystallizing as he spoke. "I'm going to show her this scarf. Make her explain how it ended up in Cassio's possession. Force her to admit what she's been doing behind my back." "And if she denies it?" Iago asked quietly. "If she has explanations, excuses, reasons why everything we've observed has innocent interpretations." Othello's dark eyes met Iago's, and in them was something that hadn't been there an hour earlier. A cold, calculating fury that transformed his handsome features into something harder, more dangerous. "Then I'll know she's not just unfaithful," he said quietly. "She's a liar too. And liars can't be trusted with anything. Not with love, not with business, not with life." The penthouse apartment above the atelier had been Othello and Desdemona's private sanctuary, a space where the fashion world's demands couldn't penetrate, where they could exist as husband and wife rather than industry figures. The loft's exposed brick walls displayed their personal art collection photographs. From their travels, original sketches from emerging designers, a Basquiat painting that Othello had purchased to celebrate their first $1 million sales quarter. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Soho's rooftops, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the October evening like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Tonight, however, the space felt more like a courtroom than a home. Desdemona sat at their dining table, still wearing the cream silk blouse and charcoal wool trousers from her day at the studio, her platinum hair catching the light from the pendant lamps overhead. She was reviewing contact sheets from that afternoon's photo shoot, her trained eye marking the strongest images with red pen, but her attention kept drifting to her husband's unusual silence. Othello had been pacing the apartment for 20 minutes since arriving home, moving between the windows and the kitchen, with restless energy that reminded her of the caged leopards she had photographed for a conservation campaign. "The Vogue proofs came out beautifully," she said, attempting to bridge the strange distance that had opened between them. "The lighting in the third series especially, it captures the texture of the fabric in a way that makes you want to touch the page." Othello didn't respond. He stood silhouetted against the windows, his tall frame dark against the city lights, his shoulders rigid with tension. In his hands, he held something that caught the lamplight's silk, she realized, twisted and crumpled between his fingers. "Othello?" Desdemona's voice carried the first note of concern, her model's instincts alert to the subtle shifts in mood and atmosphere that often preceded difficult conversations. "Is everything all right? You've been quiet since you came upstairs." He turned slowly to face her, and she felt her breath catch. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that made her unconsciously push back from the table. This was not the man who had kissed her goodbye that morning, who had promised to bring home Thai food from their favorite restaurant, who had whispered loving words against her neck while she dressed for work. "I have something that belongs to you," he said, his voice low and dangerous, vibrating with barely contained emotion. He approached the table with deliberate steps, his movements predatory rather than loving. "What is it?" Desdemona asked, genuine confusion mixing with growing alarm as she recognized the silk in his hands. Her birthday scarf, the one-of-a-kind piece he had commissioned specifically for her, painted by hand by an artist in the village, whose work appeared in galleries from Chelsea to the Upper East Side. Othello threw the scarf onto the table between them, the delicate fabric landing among the contact sheets like an accusation made manifest. The azure and gold silk seemed to glow under the pendant lights, beautiful and terrible in its implications. "Explain to me," Othello said, his voice quiet, but carrying the kind of authority that had made him successful in boardrooms, filled with people who initially dismissed him, "how your personal scarf, the birthday gift I designed exclusively for you, the piece you claimed to treasure above all your other accessories, ended up in Michael Cassio's dressing room." Desdemona stared at the scarf, her mind racing through possibilities, explanations, logical reasons why her personal item might have been found in another man's private space. I don't understand. In Cassio's dressing room? When? How do you know it was there?" "Iago found it," Othello said, his voice growing harder with each word. "After Cassio's private photo session, on the floor beside his garment bag, saturated with your perfume, intimate and personal, and completely out of place unless..." "Unless what?" Desdemona's voice rose slightly, indignation beginning to replace confusion. "Othello, what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," he replied, moving around the table toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "I'm stating facts. This scarf was in another man's possession. This scarf that you wear against your bare skin, that carries your scent, that I have seen you remove from your body in the privacy of our bedroom. How does something that intimate end up in Michael Cassio's hands unless you gave it to him, unless you were with him, unless you removed it for him the same way you remove it for me?" Desdemona stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished concrete floor. "That's insane, Othello. I would never. There has to be another explanation. Maybe it fell from my bag when I was at the studio. Maybe." "Don't lie to me." Othello's voice exploded through the apartment, echoing off the brick walls and glass surfaces. "Don't stand there and fabricate innocent explanations when we both know what this means. I've been watching, Desdemona. I've seen the way you look at him, the way you touch him during fittings, the way you disappear into private conversations that exclude your own husband." The penthouse apartment had transformed into a battlefield where love and suspicion waged war under the cold glare of halogen track lighting. Desdemona stood pressed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection ghost-like in the glass, the city lights of Soho spread behind her like a constellation of broken dreams. Her cream silk blouse was wrinkled from where Othello had grabbed her shoulders during his accusations, her platinum hair disheveled, her green eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. "You want the truth," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and righteous anger. "The truth is that I have never been unfaithful to you. Not with Cassio, not with anyone. The truth is that someone has poisoned your mind with lies, made you see betrayal where there is only professional collaboration and friendship." Othello circled her like a predator, his expensive suit wrinkled, his tie loosened, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled by rage. The successful designer who had charmed boardrooms and conquered fashion weeks had disappeared, replaced by something primal and dangerous. In his hand, he still clutched the azure and gold scarf, now twisted beyond recognition. "Professional collaboration," he repeated mockingly, his voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "Is that what you call the late-night meetings? The private lunches? The way you touch his face during photo shoots like he's your lover instead of just another model?" "I touch everyone during shoots," Desdemona protested, her back against the cold glass of the window. "That's how fashion works. We adjust hair, fix clothing, perfect poses. It's professional intimacy, not personal betrayal." "Professional intimacy," Othello spat. "Listen to yourself, Desdemona. You've even created special language to justify your adultery. Tell me, when you were in Milan without me, was that professional intimacy too? When you stayed 4 extra days, claiming business meetings but really spending time in Cassio's hotel room?" "I never went to Cassio's room." Desdemona's voice cracked with desperation. "Othello, please. You have to believe me. Someone is lying to you, manipulating you. Can't you see that? This isn't you talking, this is poison someone has dripped into your ears. Poison? Othello's laugh was harsh and bitter, echoing off the brick walls. The only poison in this marriage is your deception. The way you've made me look like a fool in front of the entire industry while you carried on your affair right under my nose. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the space between them. The scarf in his hand seemed to pulse with accusation, its beautiful painted surface now looking sinister under the apartment's harsh lighting. Do you know what the worst part is, Desdemona? It's not just that you betrayed our marriage. It's that you betrayed everything we built together. The business, the brand, the reputation we created from nothing. You've made me a laughingstock, the successful designer who can't even control his own wife. Control? Desdemona's fear transformed into blazing indignation, her green eyes flashing with fire. Is that what you think marriage is? Control? Possession? I'm not your property, Othello. I'm not another accessory in your collection to be managed and displayed according to your vision. You're my wife, he roared, his voice filling the apartment with violent sound. You took vows. You promised loyalty, fidelity, honor, and you've broken every single promise while smiling in my face and playing the devoted spouse for the cameras. The city noise from below seemed muted compared to the intensity of their confrontation. 20 floors above the Soho streets, isolated in their glass and brick tower, they faced each other across a chasm of misunderstanding that had been carefully constructed by invisible hands, fed by calculated whispers and manufactured evidence. I have kept every vow, Desdemona said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing down her cheeks. I have loved you completely, supported your dreams, helped build your empire, stood by you against my father's disapproval and industry prejudice. And this is how you repay that loyalty? By believing lies about me instead of trusting what you know in your heart? My heart is dead, Othello said coldly, his dark eyes empty of the warmth that had once made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. You killed it when you chose Cassio over me. When you decided that your marriage vows were less important than your desires. He began winding the scarf around his hands, the silk stretching taut between his fists like a rope, like a weapon, like an instrument of final judgment. The azure and gold threads caught the light as the fabric twisted, creating patterns that looked almost like flames dancing in the darkness. Othello, please, Desdemona whispered, her voice small and afraid as she finally understood the true danger she was in. You're scaring me. This isn't you. This isn't the man I married, the man I love. The silence that followed Desdemona's plea stretched through the penthouse like a wire about to snap. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued its eternal dance. Taxis moved through Soho's narrow streets. Couples walked hand in hand past art galleries. The normal world carried on while inside this glass tower. Two lives balanced on the edge of irreversible destruction. Othello stood frozen, the silk scarf taut between his hands, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, perhaps, of the woman he had fallen in love with. The model who had chosen him over her father's disapproval and society's expectations. But the moment passed like clouds across the moon, swallowed by the rage that had been carefully cultivated and fed until it consumed everything else. The man you love? He said quietly, his voice more terrifying in its controlled softness than it had been in anger. You don't even know what love means, Desdemona. Love means loyalty. Love means putting your spouse above all others. Love means honoring your promises, even when temptation presents itself. I have honored my promises, she whispered, her back still pressed against the cold window glass, her reflection multiplying in the surface like a kaleidoscope of fear. Every single day since we married, I have chosen you. I have defended you to my father, to the industry critics, to everyone who questioned our relationship. While carrying on with Cassio behind my back, Othello said, stepping closer. the scarf still stretched between his hands like a judgment waiting to be delivered, while making me look like a fool who was too blind to see what everyone else in the fashion world was whispering about. A sound from the apartment's intercom system suddenly cut through the tension, a harsh buzzing that seemed to come from another world entirely. Both of them froze, the electronic intrusion jarring in its normalcy. The buzzer continued insistently. Someone in the building's lobby demanding entry with the kind of persistence that suggested emergency or desperation. Othello's head turned toward the sound, his concentration broken for the first time since the confrontation began. The scarf loosened slightly in his hands as confusion replaced fury, if only momentarily. "Don't answer it," Desdemona said quickly, seeing the brief hesitation as an opportunity. "Please, Othello, let's just talk, really talk. Let me explain about the scarf, about everything you think you've seen. Let me prove to you that someone has been manipulating both of us." But the buzzing continued, growing more urgent, more demanding. And then came a voice through the intercom speaker. Emilio Brabantio's refined accent made sharp by panic and desperation. "Desdemona, open this door immediately. I know what's happening up there. I have proof." Othello's expression shifted, suspicion replacing confusion as he processed the implications of his father-in-law's unexpected arrival. "Proof of what?" he demanded, his eyes fixed on Desdemona's face, searching for guilt, for confirmation that her father's presence was somehow connected to her betrayal. "I don't know," Desdemona said honestly, her own confusion evident. "I haven't spoken to my father in weeks, not since the last argument about the business merger he wanted to force through our companies." The intercom crackled again. "Othello Moore, if you're listening, you need to hear what I have to say. You need to know the truth about what's been done to both of you, about who's been feeding you lies." Othello moved toward the intercom panel, his finger hovering over the entry button. The scarf hung loose in his other hand now, its silk surface catching the apartment's lighting like a question mark suspended in the air between them. "Maybe he knows about Cassio," Othello said slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of hope and dread. "Maybe he has evidence, photographs, proof that will finally make you admit what you've done. Or maybe he has proof that someone's been lying to you," Desdemona countered desperately. "Maybe he's discovered who's been poisoning your mind with false accusations and manufactured evidence." The buzzing stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of the building's front door opening. Apparently, Emilio had convinced or bribed the night doorman to grant him access. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell below, climbing rapidly toward their penthouse level with the urgent rhythm of someone racing against time. "He's coming up," Desdemona said unnecessarily, her voice carrying the first note of hope she had felt since the confrontation began. "Whatever proof he has, whatever truth he's discovered, maybe it will finally clear the air between us." Othello's face hardened again, the brief moment of uncertainty replaced by renewed determination. "If your father has evidence of your affair with Cassio, it will only confirm what I already know. And if he's here to defend your honor with more lies and excuses, then he'll witness the consequences of your betrayal." The footsteps in the stairwell grew louder, accompanied now by the sound of labored breathing, an older man pushing himself beyond his normal physical limits driven by urgent necessity. Within moments, fists would be pounding on their door, demanding entry into this private hell where love and jealousy had transformed a fashion empire's penthouse into a stage for tragedy. The pounding on the penthouse door came like thunder, violent and insistent, echoing through the apartment with the force of revelation demanding entry. Emilio Brabantio's voice carried through the heavy wood, sharp with urgency and something else, genuine fear for his daughter's life. "Othello, don't do anything irreversible. I have evidence. I know who's been manipulating you both." Othello moved toward the door with mechanical precision, the scarf still twisted in his hands, his face a mask of cold determination. But as his fingers touched the locks, Desdemona's voice stopped him. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying sudden understanding. Pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. "My father said someone's been manipulating both of us. Both of us, Othello. What if the scarf, the rumors, everything you've been told? What if it's all been orchestrated? The locks clicked open, and Emilio burst through the door like a man possessed, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from his frantic climb. Behind him came an unexpected figure, Michael Cassio himself, his face pale with shock and confusion, his hands shaking as he held what appeared to be printed emails and photographs. "Stop," Emilio commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Before you destroy everything based on lies, look at this." He thrust a manila folder toward Othello, its contents spilling across the floor. Printed computer files, bank records, photographs that told a story entirely different from the one that had been carefully constructed. "Iago," Cassio said, his voice hoarse with disbelief, "has been setting us all up for months. The emails he's been forging them, making it look like Desdemona and I were having private conversations, planning meetings that never happened." Othello stared at the documents scattered across the polished concrete floor, his mind struggling to process information that contradicted everything he had been led to believe. Bank records showed payments to private investigators, to photographers, to people who specialized in manufacturing evidence for wealthy clients seeking to destroy their enemies. "The scarf," Desdemona whispered, understanding flooding her face. "I gave it to the costume designer for the Condé Nast shoot last week. She needed it to match with accessories for one of the looks. She must have left it in the dressing room by mistake." "Iago told me you'd been having an affair," Othello said slowly, his voice hollow as the magnitude of the deception became clear. "He showed me the scarf as proof, said he found it in Cassio's possession." "I never touched that scarf," Cassio said firmly. "I never even saw it until Iago claimed to find it in my dressing room. But look at these phone records he's been calling gossip columnists, fashion bloggers, anyone who would spread rumors about Desdemona and me. He's been systematically destroying your marriage for his own purposes." Emilio moved closer to his daughter, his patrician face creased with genuine anguish. "I hired private investigators to look into the rumors about your marriage not because I believed them, but because I wanted to protect you from whatever damage they might cause. What we discovered was a deliberate campaign of character assassination orchestrated by someone with intimate access to your personal lives." "But why?" Othello's voice cracked as the full scope of Iago's betrayal became clear. "Why would he destroy everything we built together?" The apartment door, still hanging open from Emilio's dramatic entrance, suddenly filled with another figure. Iago himself appeared in the threshold, his face carrying the perfect expression of shocked concern, as if he had arrived just in time to prevent a terrible tragedy. "I heard shouting," he said, his voice smooth and caring, his eyes taking in the scene with calculated precision. "Is everything all right? Othello, you look like a man who's just discovered his business partner is a sociopath," Othello said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous calm that was more terrifying than any rage. The scattered documents at his feet told the complete story: forged emails, manipulated photographs, carefully orchestrated meetings between Iago and gossip columnists, bank records showing payments for manufactured evidence. Iago's mask finally slipped, his expression shifting from false concern to cold calculation as he realized his elaborate deception had been exposed. "You have no idea what it's like," he said quietly, his voice losing its practiced warmth and revealing something bitter and poisonous underneath. "Watching you build an empire while I remained in the shadows, providing the business expertise that made your creative vision profitable. You got the recognition, the awards, the magazine covers, while I was footnoted as a business partner. So you decided to destroy my marriage?" Othello's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute judgment. "I decided to take what I deserved," Iago replied, his true nature finally revealed. "With you distracted by jealousy and divorce proceedings, with Desdemona discredited by scandal, I could have gradually taken control of the company, redirected the brand toward my vision instead of yours." The penthouse fell silent except for the distant sounds of the city far below. The beautiful space that had once represented love and success now felt like a mausoleum for trust, for partnership, for everything that had been systematically poisoned by calculated malice. The twisted scarf in Othello's hands seemed to pulse with the weight of what had almost been lost forever. Not just a marriage, but two lives, an empire, and the dreams of everyone who had believed in the power of love to overcome prejudice and build something beautiful from nothing.